I think we have some real, they call it the pernicious incentive, right? Or the perverse, the negative incentive where, okay, we're going to encourage a behavior that we don't want to see. Okay. And this would be a classic case of, you've heard of folks that find themselves in social assistance, right? The welfare program. And I'm not trashing welfare when I say this, but
you're saying it can be like abused.
Well, if you make more money not working than working, and so your incentive is to not get out of the welfare system because it's not profitable to you. Okay. Welcome to the best Tuesday you've had all week.
Get out your pillows. Prepare to fall asleep.
It's time for the True Wealth Show. And yes, it's the best Tuesday you've had all week. And Matt and I are excited to be here, where we have got weighty topics today.
The key word of the day, riveting. It is a riveting show.
Riveting. Weighty topics.
Yes.
Very heavy. Lots of weight to them. It started with, so I actually had a client that emailed me about this and then it spidered off. I don't know if you were aware of that or not. But we had somebody that sent an email asking about how the various debt levels around the world trickle down to having an effect on sort of the microeconomy. And it's an interesting question, but I think in order to get to there's like these steps in between about debt. And why is this coming up? I mean, in my mind, it's really important given the sort of backdrop of what we're looking at in the economy right now and some of the things they're really hard to call what the outcome's going to be yet. But so far, here's the general theme I've noticed is we're close on our guessing. Like the Fed has been close, but it keeps missing when it comes to inflation. Target. It keeps thinking it's not going to be that long, and then it's that long. And then they keep saying again, no, it's going to be transitory. And then it's not transitory. And, well, things are cooling off. And then some other data point throws that off, right?
Well,
like unemployment not dropping. Wait a second.
We keep doing things that make slowing that inflation harder, right?
Yeah.
Like student loan forgiveness. I know we just decided to...
You're just going to poke the bear? Seriously?
Oh, yeah. We just carved out some more money for another section of that, right? Like we're figuring out ways to continue spending money, even though we are massively in debt.
Here's can we just make colleges somehow responsible for a portion of the debt?
Sure.
Right? Look, if you want to take a bunch of money in the form of student loans, okay, then you take on some of the actuarial risk too. Well, what if we end up with deadbeat students that aren't going to do anything with this?
Right.
And we're going to be on the hook too. And they're not paying the debt off and it's going to ding us. Right. And all of a sudden the criteria for education means something.
Right. Your lending standards might improve a little bit. Right. You're not just going to throw money at people willy nilly.
Well, I mean, I need to be really careful. Right. Because I sit on the education board for the local community college, which I think extremely highly of. Right. Because I think in terms of value for education, it's great.
Community colleges are awesome. I had the opportunity to go basically wherever I wanted out of high school, right? And I had huge scholarship offers to institutions that were, pretty awesome. But I started just looking at the numbers, right? It's like, okay, you want to give me a $40,000 scholarship. But if your tuition over 4 years is going to be $120,000,
yep, that's still a big check to stroke.
I don't want to have to come up with $80,000. So if I spend 2 years at my local community college where my tuition was $4,000 and I got half of it out of the way for $4,000, that's a good investment. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. And I think there's a tremendous investment opportunity. And I love the fact that the community college is genuinely connected to the community, right? We're starting, and I don't mean to turn this into the college show, but I will for a second.
Sure.
Just talking about
Let's go down that path for a moment.
the idea that we're seeing real efforts by faculty, administration, and all the parties that are relevant to try to create more dual enrollment credits at the high school. That means that you could be a student at the high schools that you're in our area, and you may be able to take that class and simultaneously get college credit for it.
That's just free money.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's kind of what the show is about today. It's the spending show. Where is spending appropriate and where is unnecessary debt ridiculous? And that's one of those things where it's like, if it's going to be free or, even at a really reduced rate, be responsible with your money.
It's never free. Right. That's really there is no such thing as free. It's just being paid for in other ways.
Right.
And this is probably my big beef with the system, right? And this is why I have this chip about student debt, for example. It should be an investment, right? It shouldn't be something where I spent a bunch of money to get an education that did not put me in a position to recover the costs that I endured.
Yeah, you got to look at what degree you're going for, and is that degree going to be worth it in comparison to what you're spending? Because just loving it isn't good enough.
Yeah, there's no return in it. And I can hear some people saying, well, not everything has a return. What about the arts or this, that, and the other? I understand that there are components to being well-rounded. Okay. But that's about being well-rounded, right? You still have a core component that needs to have some functional use. Okay. And I'm not saying it needs to have functional use because I'm like rigid about this. I'm saying it's because otherwise, what are you paying for? Like, you don't have to pay somebody to study art. You could just go study it because you enjoy it and do a self-study and not incur the cost.
Right. It can't just fully be about the experience.
Right.
And for too many people, it is.
Yeah. And so all of this gets back to, the debt connection, right? And I think we have some real, they call it the pernicious incentive, right? Or the perverse, the negative incentive where, okay, we're going to encourage a behavior that we don't want to see. Okay. And this would be a classic case of, you've heard of folks that find themselves in social assistance, right? The welfare program. And I'm not trashing welfare when I say this, but I am saying
it can be like abused.
Well, if you make more money not working than working, and so your incentive is to not get out of the welfare system because it's not profitable to you,
right?
Then the system itself is broken, right? It shouldn't work that way. That's an inverse incentive, right? It's a disincentive to get off of the program. Okay, well, there's something's wrong there. What are we doing? And sometimes it's not the program, it's how the person is culturally sort of warmed up to that system, right? If that's all you've ever known, then that's what generational poverty looks like. It sort of figures out a way to keep doing what it's always been doing. And so people learn to navigate the system rather than learning how to get into the economic system where they're part of the production means, right? It's, the welfare system, there's not really production, it's just maintenance and support. So how do we get folks to be contributory into the system as opposed to just taking from the system?
Right. That's a really good question.
Yeah. And it's not easily answered, right? No. So here on the True Wealth Show, we're not going to super dive into that and try to tackle it. But what I am going to say is when you have a pernicious incentive, right? Just like forgiving student debt incentivizes people to take on more debt, but it also doesn't do anything for controlling the cost of the education.
And a lot of these government programs, they're set up to where you have a budget, and if you don't spend up to that amount, guess what? Your funding
you don't get reallocated.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that all the time in a prior, working experience.
Sure.
And so I look at this and I say, we're structurally set up wrong. The government has enabled and kind of glorified bad spending habits.
And I'm not certain how to fix it, because if you were to tell the department, figure out how to save more every time, they might do that, but then they start to sacrifice the system as well.
Of the services, yeah.
So I can see the conundrum. The problem that I have in the end is that we do have, it works out to this. We have people that get the right to vote for things, but they don't have skin in the game, right? So what they can do is they can vote for redistribution to themselves. And I think it's the end,
almost like a vote buy, kind of.
Yeah. Well, and that's the issue is, so if you have folks that are buried in student debt and can't get out, and they are low enough on the socioeconomic totem pole that they're in real trouble, and so you forgive those loans, then you can, whoever forgives the loan you can really take a good bet that unless every politician running says, I'll do it too.
Mm-hmm.
The one who says they're going to do it versus the one who says they won't, that's who they're going to vote for.
Right.
Right. And while it makes sense, it's perverse in nature because you're trading the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a real challenge that there are still folks that are, principally speaking, will vote for things that aren't in their best interest if they think it's in the greater good's best interest. But I think there are a lot more people that vote self-interest than best interest.
Right. It's a hard thing to do.
Right. And the other is because best interest, that ought to be a red flag anytime you hear that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because according to whom?
Exactly.
Right. According to whom? And what I can tell you is there's sometimes where it's pretty obvious. Like it's not in your best interest to overdose on drugs. And yet for some people, that's the decision that they make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, well, those are tricky too. How much do we honor somebody's right to do harm to themselves?
Oof.
Yeah.
Now we're getting into a philosophical question.
Which is why we just need to talk about federal debt instead.
32.9 trillion.
It's just a few pennies, right?
39.2 trillion.
So what I want to do, this will be fun. We're going to see how Matt does as like a narrator here in a minute. But if you guys have, I don't even know if I've got my monitor working here. We'll figure that out in a second. We want to do this. We're going to take our first break. Okay. When we get back from the break, Matt, we're going to talk about the scale of our federal debt a little bit because we had some fun with that.
We did.
And then we got a whole bunch more to talk about, like zombie companies and bankruptcies in 2024 and all that. But we got to
fix the U.S. debt problem in the next 30 minutes.
All right. Yeah. Well, hang on. We got this covered. So stick around. We'll be right back. I'm Dave Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
Got True Wealth on News Radio 93.9 FM and 1240 KQEN. All right, gang. Welcome back to the True Wealth Radio Show, where we are going to we will commiserate with you.
How about we just throw rocks at the U.S. government, but then pick them back up with recommendations?
We're going to talk debt today, but we're also going to remind you that if you're just getting caught up, you can hear other tirades on our podcast, right? So grab that at littlejohninvest.com under the Educate tab, and you can hunt our information, something like that. Anyway, it's there. Website keeps changing, all kinds of good stuff. So go find all the goodies. But Matt.
Yes.
Help our listeners here. Like I know I'd seen this before, but I don't think you had when we looked at the graphics today about just how much debt do we have?
Right. 32.9 trillion, almost $33 trillion.
Almost $33 trillion.
But what was crazy, you found this website that like animated this whole thing. And I didn't realize the scope of how much debt that really is as a visual until you brought this video up, right? And it basically just continues to show, if you take a $100 bill and stack it up, what does it have to look like in order to equal $33 trillion? And it was like skyscrapers taller than the Statue of Liberty, and a lot of them
surrounding it. Yeah, it's like dozens of skyscrapers.
Right. And
I don't think we can fathom that.
No, you can fathom this. This is a visual I think you can fathom. If you take the US out of it and look at like the next 8 countries with the most debt, you can add up all of their debt total, and it is less than the United States total debt.
Right. Give me the stat for like the debt per citizen.
Yeah. So if we wanted to try and pay that off, every single person in the United States, including your babies and everyone, they'd have to find $98,000 to hand over. You want to compare that, and this is kind of skewed because China's population is huge, but like China, for example, each person would have to come up with $1,700 versus us at $98,000.
Yeah,
it's a staggering amount of debt.
Now, here's another
China's
question.
Got $2.4 trillion.
Do you know how big the U.S. GDP is? Now, we're not done with this year.
Oh, I have a GDP stat for you. It's not on the sheet, but I remember it.
Okay.
As a percent of GDP, I believe the United States was at 122% of GDP, whereas China was at like 13%.
Right. Well, U.S. has the economy in the U.S. Right. So keep in mind, if Matt just gave us the total debt load, right, not the deficit, that's how much they overspend every year. The debt, that's how much overspending we've aggregated and accumulated over time. So our debt's at 32.9 million. It's almost 33 million. Trillion, sorry. The U.S. economy is at the end of 2022 2002 was 25.46 trillion.
Say that again.
25.46 trillion.
So we have more debt than an entire year of our GDP.
Correct.
Right.
So keep in mind that it would take, if you didn't get a paycheck for the entire next year, but you had to go to work every day and 100% of your money went toward paying off debt, we still wouldn't be done after a year.
Yeah. Well, and you can't visualize a chart, right, on paper. But what's really interesting is when you look at how much the U.S. is spending versus how much revenue we have coming in, you look at taxpayer funding, all the different revenue streams that the government has. For a lot of years, you can go back to the 80s, run it through 2021. Our spending was higher than our revenue, but as a percentage, it wasn't like that much more, right? So our revenue and our spending weren't astronomically different, but you throw COVID into the mix and all this money printing, and our spending went off the charts, just off the charts.
Yeah. I think that it was something like more than 20% of all cash in existence for the United States was created in the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, I shouldn't say cash, all currency, because it's not all printed, right? A lot of it's just digital in banks, like, zeros and ones on spreadsheets. There's no money anywhere. It's just representative of the value.
Sure.
Right. They don't print a dollar for every dollar that exists in our economy.
No. In fact, I think the money in circulation right now is like 2.3 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
If our debt is over 32 trillion, that's 13 times more debt than money in circulation. So like, everyone empty your pockets, we still can't pay it off.
The thing that is concerning to me is that the rate it is growing, right? We're continuing to, what we hear is the deficit as a percent gets bigger.
Right. And have we actually felt the effects of some bad decision making yet?
Well,
we're starting to. We see the interest rates rising to try and slow things down. But have we actually really felt the effects of our sin?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. And I'm concerned because there are other things at play that are, they're just really super problematic. For most of these, the countries, like, I don't know if you wrote down the other 8 countries with the biggest debt, but I'd be willing to wager that the majority of them are in Europe.
UK was they were number 2 on the list, the UK, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their percent of GDP, like if 122% of our debt is represented by GDP, the UK was over 300. It's 3 times worse in the UK.
Yeah. So
they are in real trouble.
Europe, in general, Western Europe, I should say, is largely in serious trouble.
Yeah, the amount of debt per person there, over $300,000 per person.
The problem is they also have a real economic conundrum.
How did it get to this point?
Well, there's been a lot of generous social benefits.
Sure.
Right. And, when you hear people say things like, we should be able to have maternity leave and paternity leave, and we should have colleges and universities should all be paid for, and we should have healthcare, and we should have all those things. You go, those all sound like really good things until you try to figure out how to afford all of it, considering that everybody that is, because here's the problem, right? You have to pay the people to provide those things.
Like, it sounds like that really snobby person that's like, well, I want my expensive SUV, and I want my house with 20,000 square feet, and it has to have a pool, and I want at least $5 million in cash, but I don't really want to work. I don't want a job. I don't want to have to earn it. That's what this sounds like, right? We want all of these things, but we don't stop and say, well, how do we actually come up with the funds for the stuff?
Well, and that's the problem. When the money doesn't exist, but the government sort of conjures it in the form of debt, and you do it at a pace where, because the government is in a position to do that, I suppose, and you do, then people warm up to the idea that it needs to be there. And then if any elected leadership wants to take it away, those people will not be reelected. You'll just keep putting people in where the incentive is to tell the people, at least to tell the electorate or the electoral body, right, to tell the citizenry, hey, I'll do these things. I'll give you these things.
You just touched on something that I was thinking about earlier before we got in the studio, and it's we've kind of done this to ourselves in the way that we have voted, right?
Of course.
Like, if you keep putting people in a place where they're going to continue to just spend to make you say, yay, good job, you made my life a little bit easier, without realizing that it's now harder in the future with the future generations, you're actually part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, consider for a minute how we treat taxes, right? Why was a Roth IRA so remarkable compared to a traditional IRA when it came out in like 1996? They're not that old. It allowed
your money to grow, or when you take it out, you're not going to have to pay taxes on it.
Sure, but what government in their right mind would say, let's give up all the taxes on future growth?
Right.
No, the government that's thinking, I need money right now. Like, that's future government's problem. Today, government is hungry right now. Give me the taxes right now, because so there's this sort of economic theories going around, and
I'm a big one into that, actually.
Yeah, so like Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics. Those are two big overarching theories. One of them suggesting that the government should be stimulate the economy to manage the peaks and troughs. We don't do Keynesian economics here.
What we could do later on in the show? I could quiz you with 9 different ways that people have proposed for the government to fix this.
And I'll bet you I could give you a dozen more.
I could throw them out there, right? I could throw some at you and say, David, yes, no, explain it. And that could be fun.
It could be fun. Well, let's as we'll start sort of setting the table for that. So all of you listening, you're going to want to stick around for the show, because Matt's going to pop quiz here.
Mm-hmm.
But if we talk about debt, I don't know that our listeners care that much about the why. Here's the end of the thought on Keynesian economics. Government may spend in order to stimulate, but it's supposed to save in the times are good. And that's why our election system doesn't work that way. Like, oh, we have extra money. Well, we should spend it because we have it. We don't have enough money. Oh, well, we should deficit spend in order to spool the economy up so that we have money again.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, so what you're saying is no matter what, we should spend. And now we have the greatest debt in the history of humankind, as far as I know.
Yeah. I mean, there was only looking at this chart, 1 or 2 years where we were actually spending less than we were bringing in revenue.
Yeah. And I remember those times before I was an advisor. This was in the late 90s during the Clinton administration. And what was interesting is tax rates were materially higher.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the tax rates were a lot higher, but there was also just a different amount of coordination with what was going on. So we did have tax receipts in excess of expenditures.
Were there any wars going on at that time?
It was post Iraq.
Okay.
Right. So that was Bush. That was Bush Senior. That was HW. There's George W. HW
right before Bush came in. Yeah.
So Bush was there, and there was the initial Iraq War, and then Clinton was there for 8 years, and then George Bush came in, George W.
Yeah.
And there was another round of Iraq War.
Yeah, so that might have played a little bit of a helping hand without the war spending.
Well, I don't know if that's
exactly how they were able to.
The taxes were materially higher, right? And the government wasn't spending at the same rate. So for a little while, here's the thing, right? If we crank taxes way up, we will bring in a lot more money. We'll just crush the economy.
Right.
And
if you crush the economy, then there's less money to get from taxes.
Yeah. There was an interesting economic theory out there called the Laffer curve. Not like laughter, like LAUGH, right? Like Laffer, LAFFER. That was the guy's name.
Tell me about this theory.
Well, the theory was that there's a certain amount that there's only so much you're going to be able to collect in taxes, because at some point, raising taxes higher will produce lower receipts because the economy will start to shrink.
So it's like trying to find that sweet spot where you can get enough to make everything run, but not too much to where you squash businesses.
Well, it's the most that you can collect. If we were thinking in the stock market terms, right, using modern portfolio theory and mean variance optimization, it's the optimized mix of all the different investments to get you the most return for the amount of risk you're taking. Well, this, in terms of in terms of taxes versus economy, is the optimized blend to get you the most return, the most collection of tax receipts possible, right? And so, because at some point, if you slow the economy down, you shrink the wage, and then the higher tax doesn't give you any more revenue, right? It just starts to cannibalize itself.
Right.
So that's the theory. Anyway, it doesn't get a whole lot of press, but it's an interesting concept among economists, and it's not a sophisticated concept, right? Now, how you implement it, I don't know, but that's where it came from. The Laffer curve was that idea. So anyway, all this to say, as we look into the next season, we have lots of debt.
We do.
Right? The government has lots of debt. Such numbers that the average person just cannot fathom what it looks like, right? It's hard to explain. It's like if I walked up and said, oh, well, here's a glass of water, and that's how much money you make in a year. Here's an Olympic swimming pool. That's how much debt the United States has. I'd like you to empty this swimming pool with your drinking glass. Good luck. Right?
See you in 5 years.
That's kind of what it's like. It's like, that's so staggering a difference that it just doesn't compute.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you start adding zeros like that and you reach orders of magnitude, it's just, you don't get it. Mm-hmm. Oh, you can tell. No, I know the number. It's 30. Well, it's almost 33 trillion. No, I get it. You know the number. You don't get it. I don't get it. None of us gets Scrooge McDuck style money bin kind of money. Right? It's just crazy.
I love that.
So anyway, with all of this debt, what do we do?
That is the question. That's what I would love.
I think
today.
That's the setup here. The quiz is, what should we do? So the first question I would ask is, do we need to do anything? Like, do we need to haul the debt in? That's a question that we can unpack.
Because some people probably don't care.
Right. And then the other question would be, if we do, then what? All right.
Yes. Let's get to that.
Yeah. Before we can answer those questions, we need to take an obscene profit break.
So you're saying we're going to fix everything when we get back?
We'll fix it all, Matt. Or we'll talk about fixing it all when we come back. All right. Stick around. I'm Dave Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
And you got True Wealth on News Radio 92.9 FM and 1240 KQEN. Hey, gang. Welcome back to the True Wealth Radio Show, where we are unpacking and trying to, what you said fix it, but we're not in charge of that, right?
No.
We're throwing rocks at the debt, and we're trying to have a get real moment. And I think the big reason for this, honestly, is, if you're out there and trying to figure out how to navigate the system, let's understand a little bit about the debt, what's going on. You can understand a little bit about what's going on with the politics around this, right? Because there are two major players when it comes to how finances and debt get sort of managed. Right. One of them is the Federal Reserve, right? That's the monetary policy, if you will. And then the other, and the U.S. Treasury plays into that as well. You have the monetary side of things, and create the supply or the lack thereof of money, and the cost or the interest rate set. And then you have fiscal policy, right? That's how the money gets spent by our government.
Right.
Okay. So those two have material effects on what's going on in the economy. Both have, it's all contributed to massive, massive, massive amounts of debt on the books. And I remember us passing the 1-to-1 ratio where our debt began to be bigger than our 1 year GDP. And where this really got flagged was probably somewhere in that 2013, 14, 15 range with what was called the PIGS. It was Portugal, Italy, Greece, and
in 2010 when Greece declared bankruptcy.
What was that? Spain, I think, was in there too, and Portugal was in there. But anyway, that group, I think I said Portugal twice. Anyway, that group had just this really big debt to GDP ratios, and the productivity per worker, tax revenue, and total GDP was just a mess. And a lot of it came down to they just had way too robust a benefit program for their economy to afford. Right. So they were saying, oh, well, we have this. It's like their equivalent of Social Security. But it was just, yeah, sure. You start at 55 years old and take, 100% of your salary for the rest of your life. And people are living another 30 years. It's like, well, you're paying people in retirement longer than the number of years they put into the system. How do you expect that to work?
Right. Well,
right.
Those years were really kind of pivotal years because like 2010 Greece, the country collapses, right? They declare bankruptcy. And I think the U.S. during that time kind of saw that as a big red flag. Like, wait a minute, a country can actually go bankrupt. And you fast forward a year, 2011, that's when what was the name for it? There were 6 senators that got together and they tried passing a deficit reduction plan. And I think it was largely in part to kind of some of the fear around, well, our spending is going through the roof. Our debt is going crazy. We don't want to be the next Greece. And so you saw those senators try and get that deficit reduction plan to go through. It didn't go through and it failed. But those were some interesting times.
Interesting times.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this question for a second.
Yeah.
All right. One of the questions at the break, so we got all this debt, is, do we need to do anything about this? There's actually a school of thought out there that no, it doesn't actually matter. As long as all of the countries kind of have similar amounts of debt and we're sort of adding to it at a similar pace, we're at parity with each other. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, all the plates are still spinning. Just don't stop spinning them.
Right.
Right. I don't subscribe to this school of thought, just so you guys know. I mean, I'm not one that thinks you can go debt to infinity.
Yeah, it's the theory that we basically have a printing press, right?
I say it's like, well, as long as you can make the minimum payment on the credit card, it's okay. And if you can get a raise every year, then you don't have to pay off the credit card and you can spend a little bit more because, hey, I got a raise.
Does this kind of loop back to the $1 trillion coin idea?
No, it doesn't. No. That's a separate thing entirely. Okay. It just... yeah, we'll talk about that, I'm sure. Now, this just comes back to the idea that if you can grow the economy, you can afford more debt. Right? And so, and that's the theory. It's like, hey, well, you don't have to pay the debt off. You just have to be able to keep making payments on the debt. So if you can keep
and that's
that
basically
status,
what we're doing at the moment, right? Like we're not...
Sort of.
Yeah.
Except now we are watering down the currency. Like all this inflation that we have is because we have reduced the purchasing power. So we have printed money. That also is what we sometimes refer to as monetizing the debt, right? Make more money. So, I owe you $100. I have $50, but I'll print 50 more and I'll pay you back. And what you really did was got $50 worth of purchasing power, because that $50 that was invented doesn't have the same purchasing power. So the person that loaned the money out is going to get hosed, right? Well, the government borrows money. It doesn't loan it. Right. So like all those treasury bonds out there, that's borrowing money from other people and then paying them back when they mature and paying interest along the way. So our government is like, well, hey, it hoses the borrower, or rather it hoses the lender, not the borrower. And we're the borrower. So it's not a bad gig for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, let's pretend though that that's not the answer. Maybe the answer isn't just work harder to pay the interest.
Yeah. Do you want me to give you a few? So what I did before the show came up, I was like, we keep hearing everyone talk about the darn U.S. government and their debt problem, but you rarely hear about actual proposed ways of trying to reduce the debt, right? And so what I did is I was like, you know what? We need to go in and find kind of like the top proposed ways of solving this debt problem. What's out there? What are some ideas? And then I kind of wanted to throw them at you and see what your take on it was.
Okay, so this is basically a pop quiz where you're going to tell me somebody said we should try this. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what this is. Are you game for it?
I'm game. Let's do it.
Okay, so one of them was through bonds, using debt to pay debt. And I think you were just kind of talking about that in a way.
In a way, yes. Yeah. That's the idea of just keep refinancing.
Yeah.
And it works until you have a big change in interest rates.
And we just saw that.
We're experiencing it right now.
So now the government is having to, pay.
Well, it also puts the government in a conflicted position of trying to say, well, so we need to keep rates low for us. But if we keep rates low, it creates an inflationary environment, which creates a different set of problems.
It's the double-edged sword.
Yes.
Right.
And so I think you have your answer right there, that trying to unnaturally manipulate market interest rates.
That was actually number 2 on my list, interest rate manipulation, because with lower rates, you stimulate the economy too, which means more tax revenue to pay the debt.
Yeah. So and you can start to see that many of these are going to be linked together. I do think a certain amount of interest rate management isn't crazy.
Right.
But I think how much we can control the market is probably less than we realize, right? The market's going to decide And it's going to decide real easily. It's going to say, hey, Matt, can I borrow some money? And you're going to take a look and go, things don't look very stable right now. No, it's going to be a pretty high interest rate.
I need some cash, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to need some collateral or something else that's actually we're going to hold its value because I'm not interested in getting, taken
into
on this loan.
Yeah. What about spending cuts? So just reducing the amount of spending. I see it as, kind of, people's jobs are on the line, right? Like spending cuts means the person that's working for the government might not have a paycheck. That doesn't sound good. But at the same time, maybe there's ways to look at spending cuts where, we're spending unnecessary money.
Yeah. I think the devil's in the detail.
Yeah, I agree.
Because we create certain things. I mean, I've probably been unduly harsh about this. I'm going to share an example, but I'm going to try not to be totally like heavy-handed about this. I think that the TSA at airports is mostly theater, right? And there's probably things that aren't, that I don't really understand that go through like this, but the actual screening process itself of standing in a line and taking off your shoes or whatever and having all the bags scanned and all that it's not that it's a bad thing, but having the TSA do it versus having each airline at its own gate before you get on a plane do that. I can see that it's not necessarily best to have the public system paying dollars for that, especially when you have a system that kind of puts people in a position of authority, has very, very, the organization has really deep pockets, has some very strict rules about the way breaks are managed and the way that hiring and firing occurs and things. So it creates tremendous administrative bloat, and it's huge.
Yeah.
So it's like, this was a massive spend, and you go, did it actually add to the economy? Or did it slow it down?
I love free choice, right? Because think about it like this. Let's just play a game. If you have an airline, and say you take TSA out of it, and the security portion comes strictly onto the shoulders of the airline. If an airline has really strict policies, really screens people as they come through, for the person who really cares about their safety, they can spend more for that service. You could have another airline where it's like, their security's not that good and their prices are lower.
On the flip side, market. Free? Because I could also say, the organizations that make sure that companies follow maintenance protocols so that planes stay airworthy.
Right. But I think that's a little separate of just security checks.
And it goes into multiple examples. That's why I say I think the devil's in the detail.
It is.
Most of the time we like to have the things that the government provides. We actually do. But we don't like
good roads.
Yeah, we don't like the bureaucracy, and we don't like the fact that the way the government has largely handled previous issues, where employment issues, where you wanted to hire or fire somebody and somebody says it's discriminatory, it results in a lawsuit, and the fix was a really broad-reaching policy that makes it harder to function or in some way, or creates protected classes. And we've all heard the story about like the person that doesn't do their job but can't get fired.
Sure.
Right. Like we hate that. So I think the devil's in the details.
What about just the blanket statement, raise taxes?
So that's back to that Laffer curve discussion earlier in the show, right?
Right.
There is a certain amount of raising taxes would theoretically help, but it would come with some economic drag. And I think that the key here, people want to say like, we'll raise the taxes on the rich. That's not where you're not going to be successful with that, right? We've not seen historical evidence that you do that. It ends up being borne by the middle class. We just sort of redefine the middle class in order to reach them. And so, and it's because the very things that the wealthy take advantage of are things that are tax codes that businesses need in order to be viable. And, because they own the businesses, they exist in that tax realm. It's different than the employee tax realm. So, raising taxes to a certain extent, yes, but I think it is it's more like you're better off having a cocktail of several of these that are subtle than big chunks out of any one of these things so far.
Okay, so here's an interesting one. This one's a little bit controversial, but opening up immigration more. There was some statistics that came out where immigrants to the country that aren't, natively born here start businesses at twice the rate of, natural born citizens. So the theory is, you get more workers, more businesses that are up and going. That's more tax revenue. A faster growing population with that immigration, could give you more demand for goods, strengthen the economy, and help pay down the debt.
I'll tell you, for as far as I'd love to see a system where we improve and streamline legal immigration, right? But I think that's the key, is it's got to be legal. I think if you're just saying, well, open the borders up and let whatever happens happen,
that's a different story.
No, that's not my solve at all. But if you're saying the people that want to be in this country, that want to be here to contribute, that are entrepreneurial in nature and are going to be additive, like, absolutely, right? That's exactly who I want here. Do I want them to like come in and say, great, now that I'm here, let's completely change the culture? No, that's not what I'm going for. I'm like, no, come join us and help us expand and grow and enrich our culture. But don't come here and then start to say, you guys suck, everybody has to change. Like, then don't come here, go do somewhere else. But I'm all in favor of having, like immigration reform and making that work. And like, I don't care like what the person like looks like, or all those things that end up in the mix. I just like, good folks, welcome. Yeah. That's who we want here.
Yeah. So, well, how about this? How about we take a break, and when we come back, I've got 3 more.
All right.
That I really want to run past you on. How do we fix this government debt problem?
Sounds like fun. All right. We'll be right back. Stick around. I'm Dave Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
And you're listening to True Wealth on News Radio 93.9 FM and 1240 KQEN. Hey guys, welcome back to the True Wealth Radio Show, where we got a few minutes left here. Matt, you are pop quizzing on proposals for how to reduce the federal debt.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm basically throwing rocks at them. And go.
Okay, this one's really going to ruffle some feathers. Raise the retirement age. So if you go from full retirement age at 67 to maybe like early 70s, then more money would be going into Social Security and maybe less coming out. Thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think Social Security. I mean, so entitlements are 2/3 of the budget, right? So Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and so forth, that's about 2/3 of the budget.
Is it really that much of it?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
There's a lot, less than 50% of it's discretionary.
Wow.
So these entitlement programs, and they're called that, whenever somebody says like, I paid for those, and I'm like, I want to smack you. That's not why it's called an entitlement program. Okay. But to anybody that was born into the system that was already in debt, it doesn't feel like entitlement. Okay. It feels like a burden that somebody else handed us for being born here.
Right.
And now there are a lot of things that were awesome for being born here, but being handed debt because you were born here, not interesting, right? Not cool.
Okay.
Whatever. The issue would be, would it work? Yeah, it would. Right? Will it happen? Doubtful, because it's politically untenable. When might it happen? About the time that millennials outnumber baby boomers.
And they just want to take them out.
Well, no, and when it comes to voting, it's like, I think that's the real danger, is that when you have big population groups and the millennials as a population group, as they if they were to start mobilizing as a voting bloc, right now, baby boomers are a really big voting bloc still, and they're still more active, right? So they tend to sway a lot of the political narrative. But as these groups continue to age, that is potentially something that could happen, and you very well could see the retirement rates change, or ages change.
Well, and as life expectancy continues to go up, I'm sure they're going to continue to gradually.
Well, and we may yet see radical stuff. There's still proposals of like Medicare for all. That changes everything. That means everybody paying their health premiums right now, those are probably redirected from your health insurance company into like a Medicare pool, and your health companies are administering.
End up like Canada, right? Where you have a national sales tax, which is a perfect segue into my next one, national sales tax. Yeah. Canada, if you didn't know, they're at 5%. And Japan, who has a staggering debt problem, they're at 10%.
Right. So, and these tend to be considered regressive taxes because they're based on consumption, which penalizes people that have lower incomes. So, not real popular politically. Would it solve it? I don't think it solves it, because I think we have a culture problem in Congress. That's the problem.
Right.
The problem is like we already have revenue, and so great, more money comes in, we'll just spend more.
Right.
So I think it could do the opposite. It could actually exacerbate the problem.
Incentivize bad behavior.
Yeah, I think it could make it worse.
The person that doesn't have a good spending track with a credit card a bunch of cash. Well, I've got more money. Let's just go spend more on that card.
Yeah, I just don't think you're going to fix an accountability problem with more gasoline.
I like that. I like that explanation. Okay, I got one more for you.
All right.
Are you prepared to handle it?
I am. We got about 60 seconds left.
Okay, revamp the tax code.
Yeah, I actually think so.
Try and get rid of loopholes, trying to figure out ways where we can, reduce the deficit just naturally and organically.
Yeah, keep in mind the tax code was built because certain behaviors were incentivized or disincentivized. I think it'd be very beneficial to radically streamline and simplify the tax code.
Well, and like I talked about before, back in 2011, we almost had something pushed through, and I don't know if it's good, bad, or the other, but the plan was to save about $3.7 trillion over 10 years. That was how it was laid out. Would it actually have done it? Who knows?
Yeah, but, I mean, a 10% savings over 3 years, that'd be worth it to add up over time.
Right. I think we just got to go back to the drawing board, right? Like, nonpartisan, we just have to look at this and say, it's a problem. Let's actually work towards being better. It doesn't we don't have to fix it overnight, but let's at least take a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to this. We can start by doing our own part, right? Which means let's look at ourselves and then we'll look at how we can expand from there, which means if you need help, give us a shout, 541-375-0898. But we're out of time for now. So until next time, I'm Dave Littlejohn.
And Matt Dixon.
And you've been listening to True Wealth on News Radio 93.9 FM and 1240 KQEN.